Hello everyone and welcome back to 404. In this episode I sat down with student activist, Deputy President of the Irish Second Level Students' Union and all-round good friend Luke Casserly. We talk about his work surrounding the drama of last year's Leaving Certificate, along with discussing how he came to document the experiences of several students and professionals surrounding the Leaving Certificate through his podcast It All Works Out. If you'd like to get in contact with the podcast for any reason, you can reach us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, or you can email us at johnson.business.yt@gmail.com. Now, without further ado, please sit back, relax and enjoy. Perfect. Luke Casserly, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on. I think you're going to be, by the time this goes out, you'll be my first video of 2021. So hopefully we'll be in brighter times then than we are now. But for people kind of just sitting in and listening for the first time, you're obviously a student, a member of the ISSU, and you're very politically involved. But how would you describe yourself to someone who's never really met you before?
Yeah, thanks, Odhrán. It's nice to be on and nice to be your first guest of 2021. That's an honour. I'm delighted. How would I describe myself? That's kind of tough. I mean, I think student activist is probably how I describe myself if I had to put like a Twitter bio, 2 words on it. But I suppose like most of my energy over the last 3 or 4 years has been spent in the ISSU, the Irish Second Level Students' Union, and I've been kind of elected to a national position there. So I spent pretty much all of my time focused there. But I suppose before that, involved in, like most people who are interested in politics or activism, Cordon Froig, things like that, just at a local level. But activist probably, and student. I mean, I'm in college now as well, so I kind of moved away from second level and in college as well. But activist definitely, I'd say, is the label.
Mm-hmm. Despite being in college, though, you're still quite heavily involved with the Irish Second Level Students' Union. You were the former secretary last year, and you're now the deputy president this year. Where did you kind of first hear about the organisation, and what really kind of pushed you to get involved in it?
Yeah, okay, so it's a long enough story. But before issue, I was involved in Cordon, as I said, and I was on the national executive of that body. And on the executive there was someone who was on the NSC, the national executive of issue. So I heard about it. And before that, I had got a little bit worked up about like student rights and the rights that students have in school, because I was a little bit annoyed about the kind of rules in school. That's in every school across the country, and I love them for good reason. But things like uniform, phone use in schools, I just could never get my head around the fact that, you know, schools had the right or the authority to tell students how to act or what to wear. And so I got kind of exercised about that and started thinking about, okay, what if like there was this, you know, group or organization that could work on this and kind of give students a voice. But then I discovered that there actually was one around that was around for years doing this stuff, and I got really, really excited. And that year I was in 3rd year in secondary school, and there was a TY ambassador program with the ISSU, so you could sign up to kind of promote issue at a local level. So obviously I wasn't in TY, but I said, right, I need to find a way to get involved in this organization because it sounds amazing. So I signed up and became a TY ambassador while I was in 3rd year, which is hilarious because I kind of broke the rules from the start. And that was great crack, really enjoyed it. Like I got the buzz as soon as I joined. It's just such an amazing organization. So I ran for election the following year, or it could have been the same year, at the annual assembly, which is just like where the elections are and where the policy is adopted. And I was elected education officer first. So I served my first term as education officer, and I was unopposed to that election, thank God, because I was like this little naive 3rd year who didn't know much about the organization, but just really wanted to get elected. And it all started from there, really. And I loved every minute of it. It's just such an amazing organization.
And it's certainly, as much as it's a voluntary basis, at times it can be very full on and full time in some capacity. Like you were obviously on the ISSU at probably the most complicated time for students in recent memory, that being obviously the whole debacle surrounding whether the Leaving Cert was going to happen or not last year due to COVID-19. What was sort of the atmosphere like at the head of the ISSU at the time and also, I suppose, amongst the general student body as well?
Yeah, it was mad. I think anyone who followed the news around the Leaving Cert will know that it was just this mad story that changed every day, and there was so much uncertainty around it that no one really knew what was happening. And to be honest, for us, for a lot of the time, we were the exact same. So as you said, it's completely voluntary. So we're all students, and like we run the organization literally. And before that, like we had been semi-prominent working on national issues, but I suppose when the Leaving Cert issue came up and it became clear that, you know, it's going to be very hard for the Leaving Cert to go ahead as normal, we became obviously the representatives of student voice because there's no other organization that does that. So we tried to kind of represent students as best we could through that process. But that was such a massive responsibility because, like, for example, I was in Leaving Cert at the same time as trying to respond to this national issue. Luckily, our president at the time was Ciara Fanning. She's amazing. I'm sure anyone who listened to the news at that time will know who she is. And she was in college already, so she did have time to adapt to it. But really, like, through the whole thing, we said we're not going to take a direct stance on what should happen with the Leaving Cert, which we were, like people said we did. You know, we did say that we advocated for calculated grades. We didn't. What we said from the start was, what we want is to know how the Leaving Cert can go ahead in a safe manner and how it can be fair for all students. And that was our line the whole way throughout the process, because it was fairly obvious that it probably wouldn't be safe to hold the Leaving Cert as normal in exam halls with, you know, could be up to 100 people in one room. That was very clear. Then it wasn't fair to assume that students could just go and sit an exam after missing weeks and in some cases months of school. And that was our line. And bit by bit, it became clear that obviously the Leaving Cert couldn't take place. And then talk of contingencies came about. And we put out a survey at that time that got literally tens of thousands of responses. It just blew up, and our social media blew up. I think we had like 600 followers on Instagram, and by the end of the process, we had 6,000. It just completely blew up. Loads of people responded. And look, it wasn't the most scientific survey ever. There were issues with it. We acknowledge that. But overwhelmingly, like a majority of people said, calculated grades is the best option. And, you know, we were in that room with the departments, with the teacher unions, the principals unions, and that group, not just students, decided, you know, that the best solution in the year that there was calculated grades. And it was a flawed process, but I think for the time, it was probably the best option there is. And I think most people agree at the minute, I think.
Yeah, actually, just kind of touching a little bit on the way the Leaving Cert kind of panned out in the end. Obviously, it went to calculated grades, as you mentioned, and you were talking a little bit about would it have been safe to kind of, you know, group students into a room and kind of, you know, do the exams now. But I think we're kind of seeing something maybe not on the same level, but similar enough on the fact that schools are still open now at, say, the height of COVID numbers again. And, you know, there's the talk about clusters and whatnot. But I think most people with, you know, even a mildly interested view on schools can understand that clusters aren't working. You know, students are going to be interacting, maybe not so much more on the secondary school level, but more so on the primary school level, because I think if anyone has a little brother or sister, they can attest to the fact that it's impossible to stop them from running or grabbing or screaming their way through the house.
Yeah.
Just speaking a little bit and trying to loop it back then against the Leaving Cert, looking at the idea that, you know, you could have, you know, rooms of socially distanced students, you know, a single examiner. That was kind of the rhetoric being put out by people at the time as to why we should host the Leaving Cert. Just for my own sake as well, what was kind of the reasons why that couldn't go ahead?
Yeah, look, there was lots of, like, and at this time, remember, everyone was an expert in exams and education on Twitter and Facebook. I saw so many mams on Facebook comments that just like, you should be the Minister for Education because you seem to know everything that's happening. You know, there were suggestions like rent out community halls and use them as exam centres, use the primary schools because they're closed. Lots of these suggestions. But in the background, there are people whose job it is to plan exams and make sure they happen safely and fairly. And they, you know, presented to the department and to the stakeholders in the room the different options. And it would have been just a logistical nightmare to hold a Leaving Cert, you know, the most important exam in people's lives in a way that was fair on students and that was literally possible to pull off physically. And it was so hard and so difficult that, you know, it just became obvious that it couldn't happen. And I think the biggest question at that time was, what do you do with students who are immunocompromised? And there was no real solution to do that for those students. And I don't, like, you couldn't expect them to just wait till next year. And so that's how calculated grades came about. And, you know, it wasn't just students. I think the narrative at the time was, you know, on lots of radio programs and everything that, you know, students demanded calculated grades and they got it. That's not what happened. Like, people around the table who've been in the education sector for years agreed that calculated grades was the best solution at, you know, the most critical time in education and, you know, every sector of society at the time. And so it did. And, you know, as I said, no one thinks it's a perfect process, but it did the job for the year that's in it. And hopefully nothing that's drawn up over the space of a few months will have to happen for the Leaving Cert ever again.
Mm-hmm.
But that was just the reality of the issue at the time.
Yeah, I think most people listening, or even just between me and you, we could attest that the Leaving Cert, after both of us having done it, is probably not the best process of getting through life. A lot of people, even years after they've done the Leaving Cert, still talk about having nightmares about the exams the next day, and I can probably attest to it. I think I've blocked that stage of my mind out at this stage. I was actually asked in my last interview what subjects I did for the Leaving Cert, and my mind was just blank. I was like, what did I do for the Leaving Cert? It's been so long ago at this stage. But when you talk about a bit about calculated grades, and I think you're dead right in saying that a lot of people have talked about, getting calculated grades as a much more reasonable resource for students to avail of, because, it tells, say, a teacher or a college, how good someone is over a consistent period of time, as opposed to, luck of the draw on the day, if that makes any sense. Is it fair to say, though, that with the incentive going into sixth year at the time, that the calculated grades were brought in, students at the time hadn't even the thought of calculated grades in their mind. So obviously, if you're a student, if you're like me, I didn't do phenomenal the Leaving Cert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think I did a lot better than if I had been brought under the calculated grade system, because at the time I kind of put off a lot of study on certain topics in resulted for focusing on something else if it was closer to the time of the exam or whatnot. So doing along that calculated grade level probably would have gotten me a lesser score. And obviously you mentioned, and as we all know, there was the option for students who weren't happy with the calculated grade system to then sit the exam again. And was it August, I believe it was?
November, yeah.
November. So that's already into the college term at that stage. And, we talk about, immunocompromised students, not being forced to do the exams again next year. Is it not in a way a bit unfair to those students who say aren't prepared for the calculated grade segment to then have to do the exam in November and miss out on an entire year where they could be in college with their friends from school?
Yeah, look, and that's something that was a topic of discussion at the time as well. But as I said, like from our point of view, it was always about fair and equitable solutions. So obviously we knew that calculated grades wouldn't work for everyone, and it didn't work for everyone. There's actually a large cohort of people who were kind of downgraded as a result of the system. The people who would put in the graft at the last few months of Leaving Cert, who their past results wouldn't be reflected. But at the same time, there were people, as in teachers, used the evidence they had and projected maybe a grade higher than the evidence would suggest, and they were still given those grades through calculated grades. So it wasn't as bleak as people said that, okay, I didn't do any work and therefore my calculated grades would be awful. That wasn't really the case in a lot of cases. But there were a lot of people who opted for those November exams. And I suppose the decision could have easily been made that those people should have just repeated the year and do them next July. But that option was there for them to get it done quicker and sooner. And I think that was the fairest thing you could do as well, because there was no perfect solution to this problem. And I don't think there ever, like, if we were to go back, I still can't think of a perfect solution to that problem. I think what did happen was the best possible way to do it, even with all the problems that came with it. And yes, it is unfair, but unfortunately, that's the reality of the Leaving Cert. It is, I believe, and the ISSC believes, it is an inherently, in some ways, an unfair system, because it's so rigid and because it's an antique, basically. Like, it hasn't really changed since 1925. This is the first time it was set. Yes, the subjects have changed, the way questions are asked are changed, but it measures the exact same intelligence, what you learn over 2 years or 5 years and what you can spit out on a page. And it's very hard to come up with a way to change that system. So for that reason, I do think that, what happened is quite good considering that.
Yeah, and it's very important as well. You touch on the point that there is no perfect solution to what happened last year. Obviously, COVID-19 kind of, for lack of a better term, came out of nowhere. So, nobody knew that was going to be down the line. As despite early warnings from Wuhan, China, and all that virus is getting out of control, and there was no real means of kind of containing it. Nobody in Ireland, even in January time, was thinking about, oh, I wonder if we'll be in lockdown in March. So it kind of just came all of a sudden. So I do agree with you in that sense that it was very much a a non-perfect solution, but I think the main takeaway from it is that it proves that there is, alternatives to the traditional leaving cert system. Being able to have this calculated grade option now opens up a new way for assessing students that I think is, in my opinion, and I'd argue, I presume as well in your opinion, is probably a better way than the traditional system we have at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it definitely, just to finish off, I mean, I think a lot of people now acknowledge that the Leaving Cert is far from the perfect way to assess students. So my hope is that over the next 2 years that, Leaving Cert reform, happens quicker and is brought to more national prominence, because it really is time to change it up. And look, it's not as simple as just, letting everyone do whatever they want for 2 years and then, give them a certificate at the end. It's not that simple, but I think it's time to really look at it and change it up, because it's just so old and outdated.
And you speak of national prominence, and we talked about earlier, and you mentioned that the ISSU at the time of this sort of debacle with the Leaving Cert had its position elevated amongst politicians and politicos all across Ireland. And the big thing at the time was, I remember Malcolm Byrne at the time. Thomas Byrne was speaking out in the Dáil, quoting bits from the ISSU and talking about, how calculated grades need to be brought in. He certainly wasn't the only individual. There were several others from the opposition benches as well. And you talked about how you kind of got a bit, the ISSU had its position elevated to a sense that it was in communication a lot more with, say, the government and whatnot. Have you noticed post that you're still having that same level of interaction with the government? Have you had these sort of discussions with, say, Norma Foley now, or any of the other opposition education spokespersons since then?
I'd say definitely. It's definitely improved. It's probably not as good as it was in the peak of, the crisis, but we're still involved. Like Thomas Byrne, these people know who we are, and that, wasn't the case beforehand. So that's a positive. We're on the advisory group, similarly to the last Leaving Cert for the 2021 Leaving Cert. So with the teachers and the principals and everything, and Minister Foley, we're around that table. So we're still involved in the process and we're still consulted. Similarly with the Oireachtas Education Committee, we've had a few appearances there over the years, but now they've kind of, since the new committee was formed, they've committed to having our voice heard on a regular basis, which is why we exist as an organisation. So it's great to see. It's like to have student voice involved in the process, not for students to decide everything, the answer to everything and for them to agree to it. That's not why we exist. It's just to have our voice heard in the process. And that's happening now more than ever, which is a really positive thing, I think. So it's obviously, this year's been a mess, but some good things have come out of it. And I think for us, that's one of those things.
Just to kind of maybe go back a little bit, we talked a little bit about the atmosphere at the head of the ISSU table at the time and the general student body coming around to the Leaving Cert last year. You hosted a podcast not too long ago, an almost audio documentary style, asking various students from the year just past about their experience with the year. This was known as It All Works Out. So it was under the Lust for Life banner, which is I believe a content-driven mental health charity founded by Neil Breslin, or is it Niall Breslin? Niall Breslin, I think. How did that opportunity come about?
Yeah, so I suppose like I would have been in the media a bit as a spokesperson for the ISSU at that time, and someone who works for Lust for Life, Rachel, she just reached out to me and said, look, we have an opportunity that we think you might like, and so I hopped on a Zoom call and they just presented the idea of a podcast that explores the emotional fallout from the year that Leaving Cert had, and I thought, okay, this is a really great idea, because people are hearing all this high level information about, how the exams can take place, when they'll take place, what will happen. But I think there wasn't much of a focus on the actual mental and personal impact of all that news on Leaving Cert. And that's exactly what It All Works Out tried to do. So it's literally just me having a conversation with other Leaving Certs about how they felt during this period. And it kind of brings us through the whole process. And just talking, how did you feel at this time? How did that change? What emotions did you feel? We asked people at the start of the podcast, what do you want to do after the Leaving Cert? And then we kind of catch up with them at the end. And it's just what we spoke about it as the time was like a kind of big group hug for the class of 2020, just for people to realize that, everyone kind of feels the same. Because I know people who listened to even the trailer, said, okay, that's exactly how I feel. I think most people felt the emotions that were stressed in that podcast, uncertainty, anxiety, stress. I think the vast majority of students felt that. And that's what we spoke about in that podcast. And as well as that, we spoke to like Brady, as you said, he founded A Lust for Life, which is an amazing charity, I have to say. We spoke to him about, the Leaving Cert and how it isn't, like we spoke about earlier, the best way to examine people. We spoke to psychologists, a comedian, other people, just to get perspectives about the Leaving Cert and how, it's just one part of life. And as the podcast suggests, it does all work out in the end. And just to try and remind people of that. So it was a lovely experience. It's a 6-part podcast series. Do give it a listen if you get the chance, because it is a nice group hug. And I'm sure interesting to hear, even if you weren't in Leaving Cert, to kind of understand the year we had.
Because I was listening back to the series there again recently, and I still can't attest enough how well put together and informative it is. And like as a history student as well, I can also admire the almost first-hand source of information coming from students in the series. So that undoubtedly I think will be used by historians in the future when looking back on this period. Within the series, you kind of sit down with a large variety of people from all different sorts of backgrounds. How did the sort of process for picking these people come about?
Yeah, it was like it happened very quickly, obviously, because like this all took place in the peak of when all the Leaving Cert stuff was happening. So I kind of sat down with Rachel, as I said, she works with Lust for Life. She's like an editor, and then Ciara O'Connor Walsh is the creative director of A Lust for Life, and she works on Brezi's podcast as well. So it's kind of what she does, and she's amazing at it. She's a podcast producer, pretty much. And we just spoke about what perspectives would be good and what perspectives would help students. And so obviously other students was the priority, but we also thought about, get a psychologist in there to give the science behind the facts. So we have a couple of psychologists and, like people whose job it is to look at the science of that. But also like there was Mick Finnegan, for example, who was homeless on the streets of Dublin, moved to London at a young age. And he spoke about how, all the hardship he went through, and now he's in Trinity College studying to be a social worker at, I think he's in his early 30s. And that was just a perspective to prove that, yes, this was a really hard year for us as, 18, 19-year-olds trying to sit the most important exam of our lives. But here's an example of how it all works out in the end, even if it takes an extra 10 or 20 years. So that was just one example of a perspective that would be more useful than maybe another Leaving Cert. And I think that episode in particular, I really liked because it really did work, because we had such a hard year. But again, like there's people who are having a lot harder time than you are. And I think that helps to put things into perspective at times as well.
Is there any sort of like, looking back on the series now as a whole, is there any questions that you wish you had kind of asked that you didn't get a chance to?
Yeah, I suppose not. Like I'm very happy with the whole thing. But I think if I was to go back, we didn't actually interview people once the calculated grades came out. So that's kind of a gap in the process that I would have loved to return to. But I suppose we had kind of, because the timeline was all off and we didn't really know, like at that stage, we didn't know when the results would be out. We kind of just finished it up after the 6th episode. So if I was to go back, I'd probably put in a 7th episode and talk to students when they got those results. But no, I am happy overall, definitely, I think.
Touching a little bit again then on the ISSU, and kind of just to segue into my next point, I think I'm right in assuming that you met Eric Ahigi through your first time through the organization. Am I correct?
Yeah, I actually, Eric's from Longford as well. So I'm from Longford. So I actually knew Eric was in first year with me in school, in secondary school, and then he moved school in second year. So I knew him then. But you are right. I really got to know Eric through the ISSU. He was the quality officer for a year. And that's when we really had developed a good friendship.
Yeah. And recently you sort of started up, can talk about podcasts again, another podcast called Political Incorrectors. First of all, just for my own sake, where did the name sort of come from? What was the sort of thinking behind it?
Yeah, okay. When people hear Political Incorrectors, they're like, oh God, what is this? They're going to be politically incorrect. That is not the case. Definitely not. Far from that. I suppose we did struggle to come up with a name, and in the end we came up with Political Incorrectors. And the idea of our podcast is, coverage of politics in Ireland is very kind of, in the most part, traditional, stale, male, on the radio, in the newspaper, apart from your amazing podcast, Odhrán. So I suppose the idea is that we're kind of incorrecting that process and putting it across in a youthful manner that will appeal to young people. and just have a very open and honest conversation about politics in Ireland and, across the world, but mainly in Ireland. Mm-hmm. And that's where the name came from, pretty much. So we're definitely not politically incorrect. Don't worry. That's turning me off the podcast.
Yeah. You've as of recording, you've only uploaded 2 episodes, and one of them is an interview as well. So it's kind of 2 sort of different varying styles. I think probably the pandemic had a large part to play in the sort of, I would imagine, lack of episodes at this stage. Mm-hmm. But is the podcast something in the future you're kind of hoping to do on more of a regular basis, or is it just something you kind of do when both of you are just free?
Definitely. Like, it was the logistics of it all at the start were very tough because Eric was in Galway. I was in Longford, obviously, and then our producer has a job and he's also in college. So it was literally just trying to get in the room that made it hard to record episodes. As I'm sure you know, the logistics are like nearly harder than the actual recording. Yeah. But so we recorded the first episode when Eric was here, and then the second episode Eric was here. And then, like, obviously restrictions came in and it wasn't really appropriate for us to meet up and do it in person. And so at the minute, we're looking at doing it remotely and just finding the best way to do that. But we do have great plans for next year, and we hope to like get a regular upload pattern, definitely. But it's I really love those 2 episodes, and it's something I'm excited to work on in the future, because I think, like, apart from your podcast, there are very few other podcasts that do this kind of work, and it's so important because I think, like, what me and Eric identified as a need for this was like discourse around politics among young people. And yes, Irish political Twitter is just a bubble, but at times it's very toxic and it's worrying because it's just so polarized. And I don't think facts or like emotions or how other people feel come into it at times. For example, you have, Fine Gael hate poor people, and that's just it. Sinn Féin are terrorists, and that's just it. And the narrative really isn't that simple. Mm-hmm. And the kind of things we want to explore is that, it isn't that simple. And so we want to obviously talk about the issues from our youth perspective, not as experts, just to give our point of view, but also talk to politicians and try and show people that they're just real people like you are, and they have emotions, and they're trying to, like, the vast majority of them are just trying to do their job and do it well. And that's kind of the aim of our podcast. So hopefully it comes into more fruition next year, but that's the kind of aim of our podcast.
Yeah, 100%, because I even from just listening to the 2 episodes, like, I am actively waiting for more of your content to come out, because I actually find it really enjoyable. Especially, I think with the first episode you kind of did, you reached out to people through Instagram asking them, what would you like us to talk about? And I think that's a really interesting way of kind of getting individuals to sort of submit questions that they have. And as you said, a lot of the time on Twitter, you'll kind of see rhetoric going around. And I think I've made it more of a sort of a case for myself never to respond to it anymore, because you'll just get bogged down in constant like debates that really have no meaning, or they're just not based in any form of reality. So I've left it a little bit, but as you say, like, there's a lot of toxicity online, and the best part about it is, more so for your podcast, because you've sat down with a local councillor who doesn't fit the mold of a traditional Fianna Fáil councillor or Fianna Fáil member that everyone would kind of be associated with. Like, so it offers this sort of fresh perspective in a way that, not everyone's the same, and kind of labeling one party as this, that, and the other is wrong, because at one stage or another, you'll find each side defending their own party when they're slandered against, and then they'll go out and do the exact same thing to the opposite party. So no, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, and I think I've kind of got a little bit of a tangent there near the end. So I suppose, just to wrap it up, my final question for you is, obviously you're still quite young, you've only started college now. What does the future hold for Luke Casserly?
Good question. I wish I knew the answer to. Well, I'm in college. I'm studying to be a teacher, a secondary school teacher, English and religion. So that's the plan. That's what I'm kind of throwing a lot of my energy into now, obviously trying to get through college. But obviously I want to keep up. I'm still in the ISSU, finish that in about 6 months. So from there, I don't really know what the future holds, because that's where my energy has been for the last 4 years, in student activism. Obviously, I need to leave second level student politics and activism aside, because I'm not in secondary school anymore. But definitely, I see the podcast with Eric as something I'll put a lot of my energy into, and trying to find a space for, student activism again. But to be honest, I don't have like a definitive answer. Just, staying involved, staying active. I love politics. I think it's so interesting. So just staying involved, trying to find a path, I guess.
Yeah, perfect. Luke Casserly, it's been an absolute pleasure sitting down with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Odhrán. It's been lovely.